Gabby Reece.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Great. How are you? How's it?
Good. Look how red my face just got. Like, do people fangirl about you as much as I have in my correspondence with you?
I think that people are excited that I'm still alive and moving, and it
Okay. This
I'm I'm still alive and moving.
you're oh, you're wearing your Jen Meyer necklace. I asked Jen Meyer about you because I'm like, I'm so nervous to interview Gabrielle Reece. Maybe put it down a little bit. Yeah, we want to see that Jen Meyer. And I'm like, I think she wears a lot of your jewelry. She's like, oh, she's really nice. And I'm like, cool. She seems really nice. Guys, I wanted to first, Gabby, thanks so much for joining us. I know you're extremely busy juggling all the things that you do. Guys, I'm sure that if you're Gabby's followers, you know a lot about her. I, on the other hand, have lots of fashion followers, and we're probably like, that's Gabrielle Reece from Elle magazine from the 90s. And so it's like Gabrielle Reece. And I'm like, no, she's Gabby Reece. Gabrielle, just to a quick little roundup for those of you who don't know. Just going to go over a little bit of a list. Sorry, Gabby, you can like go to sleep or take some notes or like text a friend. She has been a pro volleyball player. Actually, I had to write these down, which I've never had to do with any of my guests. She's the first female spokesperson Nike ever had. She was the first woman that Nike asked to design a shoe, and that shoe was the first shoe to outsell the Air Jordan. I'm not nervous at all.
Same designer. That's
what?
Why. My designer was the same as it's a guy named Tinker Hatfield. So that was a good,
Yeah, I'm sure it had nothing to do with you at all, really. She's a New York Times bestselling author. She's developed the XPT Peak Performance Training Program with her husband, big wave surfer Laird Hamilton. And she's now, because she was bored, I guess, now doing a podcast. And she's the host of it. It's called the Gabby Reece Show. And she is what I would call a certified badass. So, Gabby, thank you so much for being on my show. I'm incredibly honored that you would do this. I think why I'm so nervous about having you as my guest, and everyone knows that like, I've shot tons of movie stars, meet lots of fabulous people, but you are what I would call sort of, from the research I've done, like the mastery, the embodiment of what I would call high vibe. And I just crystallized it on our drive down to Montauk, where we listened to a podcast, and I got even more nervous. You seem to have mastery of your physical strength. You appear to have mastery of your mental strength, and you appear to have a mastery or a really well-honed knowledge of your spiritual self or your essence. And that is really, I know what I want to ask you about. I mean, how did you, I know this is a hard question, how did you get there in terms of this different sort of mastery over these modalities and things about you? And if you could maybe take us through like the journey of all these things that you've done that could help explain how the different building blocks that you had to do, I'm assuming. It's a loaded question.
Oh, no, I'm just thinking, listen, let's say one thing right off the top. I haven't mastered anything, and I'm on the journey like everyone is. And so maybe, I grew up in a kind of a bumpy way in the Caribbean, and and for a few years I actually lived in Long Island with a couple that were not my parents from age 2 to 7. And so maybe very early I got put in a role of observing things, necessity for survival. I think where you're assessing even when people act a certain way, you look down and you sort of look at that accumulation of action, and you think, I can remember at a very young age being like, oh, I don't think that works. And like growing up in the Caribbean, I had a lot of adults around me, let's say that they partied pretty hard. And I remember as a young person and sort of looking at the story of it and thinking, I understand, I can see what's fun about it, but I don't know that it works in the long game, right? And so for whatever reason, maybe I've been equipped naturally and also with a little bit of survival instinct in sort of the long story. And so then I was also really fortunate. It's got nothing to do with me. I was fortunate enough to be put in environments, by the time I was 15 in athletics.
Mm-hmm.
So by nature, I have a pretty rigid personality. I actually have a daughter that we're 6 days apart, and I see a lot of myself, some of the stuff that she was born with, that it's a rigidity that actually can work against you. It can flex against you. But in certain things like sports, it can work in your favor because you can work hard at task completion, and there's like a frame around it, and it makes sense, and, winning and losing and points and all of this stuff. So, and then having really great mentors within that environment, like coaches or caring people for the family. And then I went to college on a scholarship, which was completely by accident. I think it's really important for people to realize I've never really had a plan, and that I never aspired. It wasn't like I aspired to like, oh, I'm going to play college, or I'm going to play professionally, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. I was really trying to figure out how to navigate my future and take care of myself. And so when these opportunities popped up, one thing I was always pretty good at was like, oh, I can do that, and I'll work really hard, and let's see what happens. And I started modeling simultaneously, playing college athletics so that I could earn a living. And I actually gave up my scholarship after my sophomore year. So I lived in New York. Thank God for Rachel Williams, if any of you remember her, and Ashley Richardson, because they were so tall that they allowed.
They were so what?
They were so tall, Rachel and Ashley. So tall that, like, when I met Steven Meisel, he was like, oh. And so I had also a good slipstream, my timing. If it was 6, 7 years later, maybe not, but there was a couple very big girls. I'm 6'3". Rachel's a very big, powerful woman.
She is, yeah.
They were on trend. There was a lot of photographers, like I said, Steven Meisel, Patrick Demarche, Peter Lindbergh, all these guys. They were like, oh, okay, yeah, it's a big girl, it's okay. So I think also that timing was pretty excellent for me, because people have to remember life is about timing, and I do think we have journeys, and doesn't mean we don't have input and we can't move left or right. I just think maybe the idea would be, if we're really doing our best and we're trying to peel away our crap, that we have an opportunity to get to that story, to get to that, whatever our meant story is. I don't know. And sports helped me maybe have a good foundation into then everything else.
When you say sports had a good foundation, do you mean, because I noticed you said a rigidity that helped you accomplish or be a sportsman, but also to be that type of athlete, or any athlete doing any kind of team sport, don't you have, like, do you think it was your mental perseverance at that point, your mental game, which when you said, was that the thing that kind of helped you peel away the layers then to be able to slip into these zones that were coming to you?
Yes. And I think, again, there's something, maybe some of us, or we're all born with certain things pretty easily, naturally. And I don't think I was much of a wallower. So if something was a bummer, or somebody wronged me, or a parent didn't show up in a way I thought they should, yeah, I was bummed. And yes, I overcompensated in some actions, but it didn't make me go, oh, and why me? And I think it's really important in life that sometimes it does happen to us, but at some point we can't, it's not that we can't accept that, but we have to flip that on its head and be like, yes, this happened to me. That's not who I am. And if I keep telling that story over and over and over, it will keep me from, the gift that is for me, which is maybe the opportunity to express myself the way I see it in my mind, in my life, not the things that happened to me when I was younger or whatever. So I think it was also kind of going, yeah, that sucks. And I actually have things in my personality that I have to work on as a byproduct of that over there. But let's keep moving forward, and let's keep appreciating what is good. And also, as I've gotten older, having compassion and the remembrance that people did the very best they could, and then let that go. Having said that, one thing I've also gotten pretty heavy about is I can love people and accept it, but if it's not good for me, I never feel the obligation to keep reinserting myself into that situation. So I think it's an important duality. Like, hey, I love you. It's totally cool. But by the way, good for me. So I'm not going to apologize for like not re-putting myself in that. So that's the other side with.
So when you talked about this awareness that you had of when, I mean, the other thing I feel like I've gleaned about you and why I said you had mastery, and I know that's a heavy word, and I guess that was just my way of saying that you're the most skilled. You seem to be extremely skilled in these different areas of which I said, athletic performance, mental performance, and spirituality, because I feel that to have that awareness, I mean, it's called mindfulness now we call it that, but it seems like from a really early age, from what you're describing to me, you had this awareness. Oh, boom, that happened. Oh, I can do that. That's like this, people worked forever to even get that. Were you born that way? Did you have to work on it? Or, you know what I mean? Did you, maybe because you had these challenging moments when you were younger emotionally, how did that come about, this hyper awareness of your mindfulness at such a young age, it appears?
I think it's a combination of naturally being this way and also fear heightening the skill earlier than normal. So if you're living with people that you don't know, or your mom is, you know, certainly doing the best she can, but at that time she's not around, and I wasn't living with my father, and then he passed away because I was 5. Maybe that got switched on a little earlier, where I had to navigate. And I will say that overall it's very positive. However, you get to a certain age where it works, but you have to be careful, because it's also it's so heady that you're not participating also. So it's not just about processing things and analyzing, but it's also like, then when you're going to play the game of relationships, marriage, parenthood, you have to switch that, because that doesn't work well there all the way.
So was that sort of the next step for you in your, I don't want to call it psychological work, you know, your psyche, you know, because I positioned it, and why, you know, going back to you, it's like this mental strength, physical strength, and spiritual awareness, which I would call a kind of a strength, or a hyper, you know, you're close. Do you feel like when you talked about your marriage or family or whatever, was that like your next level of mental acuity, mental strength, self-awareness, whatever that was? And what was that like, and how did that happen?
Yeah, I think my adult life in sports was really good for me, because also I was very apologetic always for being singled out or having an opportunity. It was really uncomfortable for me. And the other part of that was getting to a place where I stopped feeling guilty for being singled out. I often say people are groomed for success, and when you're not, it can be really an uncomfortable thing, and it's confusing. And you also, if you're sport, you really don't want to be singled out, but then also you go, these are opportunities for me. If I work hard and I'm diligent, you know, it's all that. So I think actually the next phase was trying to reconcile all of that. And women go in general where we don't answer emails like sorry as the beginning, or if that's okay. When we stop doing that, I think there's something really important that happened. But it also was helpful for me. I met my husband at 25 years old. And so I think when you have a really good partner, like I have a very good partner in Laird, you also learn that I think you get empowered in a different way, and then you don't need everyone to agree with you, and you don't need everyone to, like, you know, it's like even being the boss, you have to say, hey, this might make you uncomfortable, but I'm just dropping off information, and people might be pissed and they may not like you, but that doesn't make you a bad person. So I think that reconciling actually happened first. And men seem to execute this better, like this is just the way it is. And so I watched that practice, and I was like, yeah, I need to be more like that. And you're not going to make everybody happy no matter what you do, even when you try. So why would you do that? Why would you not think, okay, where am I coming from? Am I coming from love? Am I coming from ego? Is this right? Whatever. And what is my role in this dynamic? Like, if you are the boss and the buck stops at you, then you're in charge of that. So it was all of that. Then I think certainly a deeper level of marriage. You know, we had to go through some bumps. And then children kind of just crack you open ultimately. And I have 3 daughters. So daughters crack open their mother in a whole new way, if they're willing. And so, I think with all those dynamics in place, you have the opportunity to go, oh, am I going to keep working on all this stuff? Or am I just going to lock and load like, well, this is how it is? And I think when we go to the place where we say, I don't know, scary, uncomfortable, that happens.
So most people, when they get to these stages, maybe bumps or whatever, you know, they go through some training, they go to therapy. It seems like what you have naturally have or have now or came away with at an early age is something that's very, it's pretty extraordinary. Did you, during these other phases, have you ever gone to like any personal growth things or not?
Yeah.
I don't want to get personal therapy, read books or whatever, you know, that kind of stuff. Tony Robbins, I don't know, like to get all this, because it's very, very finely tuned what you have from what I've seen. And it's something that people aspire to and don't not that many have.
It's a hot, first of all, it's a hot mess. It's not finely tuned, but there's a couple points to that foundation. One being naturally I've never tried to fool myself about the laws of the world or the universe. Like the truth is the truth. You know when you're trying to manipulate, you know when you're being forthcoming, you know when you just want to be right versus like you really try, like you intuitively when you practice that. And I live with a person who is so very direct about all things, and also nothing gets put under the carpet. So there was a practice always of like, well, what's up? And even being able to verbalize things that were confusing or didn't make sense, but they still were feelings, and having a partner who's like, yeah, okay. So I had that practice instilled. And then as I got older and I started having children, absolutely, I read books. And Byron Katie is a woman she has a program called The Work. And she helped me, my middle daughter, you know, she had her own unusual path. She's now 16, but starting at 13, you know, there was some like, times. And so Katie really resonates with me because she isn't telling me how to be. It's more of the question, like, oh, well, is that true? Or, you know, just our narrative. Mm-hmm. And so she helps you kind of unpeel and let go of the narrative, and also be okay with it's uncomfortable sometimes when we have a certain way of being and our children say, and that's exactly the worst way to be for me. Mm-hmm. You could say like, no, but let me explain all my intentions and I love you and I'm here and I've been here and what I meant and you know that. Or you could say, all right, let me take a look at that. And there's a lot of power in just taking a look at it and not needing to justify or explain to everybody what you mean or what you intend. Just take a look at that, because what I have found, especially with my children or even with my husband, is when I don't fight and I just go, okay, and listen, we get through everything so much quicker. And your kids will, and eventually the metric on the storytelling is longer, obviously. They appreciate it, I think.
So let's take a little bit, let's go a little bit back in this like arc of your career. I know that my viewers are going to be particularly interested in the modeling bit. Not only were you like a model, and you worked with, but you're not just a model. You worked with some of the biggest, brightest stars. One of them, sadly, who's not with us right now, Peter Lindbergh.
Yeah.
What was it like going from being a pro volleyball star to being a supermodel and being named like one of the most beautiful women in the world or something by Elle magazine? Like, what was that whole thing like, and getting into that world and being on photo shoots? Mm-hmm. You know, what was that like?
You know, I'll be honest with you, I never bit the
You what?
I never bit the hook. I was a working person. Like, I had a job to do, but I also, the education, like I worked with Irving Penn and Polly for American Vogue. Like, I'd be at those kinds of sets. Like, I mean, you know, Albert Watson, I worked with Albert so many times for Italian Vogue with Manuela Pavesi and Sarah Jane Hoare, British Vogue, and like these really talented people. So I guess for me, what I did is I really appreciated the artist. I knew it was very clear to me that I was working with really brilliant artists.
Wow.
When I say it didn't bite the hook, I was a working girl. I was there to show up. I had a job to do. I was showing up on time. If they said if Stephen Klein was like hang from a, you know, trapeze for 2 hours, you would do it. But it was funny because it was at the late 80s that I started. I started in 88. So that's when all that started going on. But I'll be really honest, because I am calculating, I knew I was going to have a limitation because of my height. My foot is an 11. Now it's a 12. Then it was an 11.
Oh, that's a bummer. Yeah.
Like now I'm a size, I weigh about 175. When I was playing in college and modeling, I was about 165. I was a little bit muscular. I was size 8 at 6'3". I mean, you know, I would go to Paris and they would just be like,
yeah.
What the hell are we going to do with you? I mean, I was getting wrapped in, like, I was oiled up and like wrapped in, like they didn't, you know, they were like, we're going to take your picture, but we don't know what to do with you. So I think for me, I always had real perspective. And then I was at the time when it was like Cindy and Linda and Christy and Naomi and Claudia Schiffer, and the list goes on and on. And I knew I wasn't, not only did I know I couldn't be as diverse as they could be, I knew that I was going to have to express myself another way. And what was really interesting is I had an in New York called Abe Schreiberman. And he used to say to me, why are you playing volleyball? Because I would tuck out for 5-6 months to go to school and play ball at college. He's like, you should make your money now. And I was like, I know, but I really love the sports. Makes me feel like who I am. And this is a great job, but I'm going to trust that. And I don't think at 50 years old, I'd be sitting here with you if I just tried to be pretty for a living. There's only like one Cindy Crawford that goes on and on and on. And there's only one Christy Turlington. And I think for me, my path had to include sports because it really was going to be my journey, even though I didn't know that at the time.
That is fascinating. That is fascinating. So did you, I mean, what kind of came next, or how did you transition out of that? And was it like when you got married, or what was the, what was the transition out of it?
It was easy. Once I turned 22 and I was done playing college volleyball by about 2021, I was still working. And I started volleyball. Then I turned professional. Once I could turn pro, now I can make a living off of endorsing myself. When you're in college, you're really restricted because of NCAA rules. And there's just things you have to be cool. And so once I turned pro, then I signed a deal. And then what I did was I took all the stuff that I learned modeling, like, well, who is shooting me and what is the creative and what are the storyboards? So when I knew, because my platform, beach volleyball, was so small, that if you were going to see me in an ad or a commercial, I was going to be in charge of making sure that it was that high-end quality. So if you ask me, fashion was the one that taught me about really pulling those worlds, and the importance of who's going to shoot you is important, especially when you're a female jock and they say, hey, can you stand there with a thing in a volleyball? And it's like, no, I can't. It's better for you to see me as a woman. And, it's like, it was playing that cat and mouse game a little bit too. So modeling really taught me a ton. And then I could, and people always, they would see pictures of me and they thought, oh, she's modeling still. Like they got all blended together longer. And even now people are like, are you still modeling? And I'm like, yeah, no, like I'm not modeling, but it's still, I'm still in charge of the image that way. When people, it's like, I know what their work looks like before they get here. I see books before they come and they go, just so you know, I go, I already know. That's why I'm here. And if I didn't like your work, we wouldn't be doing this. So I think it was that training early.
Wow. I didn't realize that at all. I mean, first of all, I did see that when you and Laird did that thing. It looked like a Ralph Lauren. Maybe it was for a car commercial recently.
Yeah.
Pardon?
Yeah. It was the Land Rover campaign.
And then I was like, oh, maybe she's still a model. Like, whatever. I'm sure if someone great called, maybe you would. But I did remember seeing, as I was studying, there was a great picture. It was a Nike picture, though. And you were like, it looked like Jill shot it, or like,
oh yeah,
like maybe I don't want to even say, like, what if they said like, oh, let's get Walter Hughes Jr. I mean, I don't know if he ever shot you, but maybe it was Jill. That was Jill.
Well, actually, some of the Nike, I can remember. Okay, I'll throw a name that barely any of you will ever have heard of.
I will know.
Deborah Turbeville shot me before I was even signed as a Nike athlete, and I went as a model only because I was fit, and I was running in we were on some block island, or I can't even remember. And Deborah Tuberville shot me for Nike before I was a Nike athlete. Then when I signed with Nike, Albert Watson shot me with my shoe. So what happened is
Okay.
you would pick people, or they would, I was always like, listen, I'm open, because you want to make people have a vision, right? You have to respect that. So it's like, well, show me who you like, and then let me see their work. And if they, you have some of these art directors and stuff, they're really talented, they know what's going on, and you go, great, I'm looking forward to that. Because the other thing was, how do you work with as many different people that see you differently, that you get to do something different? Because I think the mistake is when you try to control it, then it's always the same. Where if someone interprets you in a different way, you're like, oh, wow, I never saw myself in that way, and they did, or whatever. I always said that Philip Dixon shot me the most how I felt like I looked, or I wanted to look,
Loved him. Loved him. Loved him.
And he, when I was 18, was like, hey, listen, you're perfect the way you are, because I think he knew I was my size and stuff. But meanwhile, like, I did Playboy in 2000, Philip shot it. So I think it was just that education, so that you could protect your image. And then I do it for, I do it for Laird, so it's like the same, you learn. But those people, their talent, that's really important. That's everything.
That's so nice that you say that, because I was like, oh, I'm just like a fashion girl calling this woman up. I mean, I hope I proved that I knew who you were, and I've been a huge fan since, forever. But it's nice that you have that appreciation still, and that obviously you're an intelligent woman and you're an incredible businesswoman. So of course it makes sense that you're using all this. So, let's talk about that business acumen. How did that get honed on top of all these other skills?
Yeah.
That to me is just, so how did that get honed? What was like your first business? I mean, I guess you were always had your own business, whether you're a pro volleyball player, a model. Now you have these other businesses, but tell me about that.
In your 20s, I was doing TV because volleyball was so small that I knew that if I was going to support myself the way I was, wanting to build a big career, and not in the way of like, I want to have a big career, but this idea of like expansion, like expression, not success or accumulation. That's not what I mean. Just like, what else? And so I was always interested in TV. So I started interviewing people in the early 90s for MTV and doing other shows and developing that skill. But because I was on this tiny little sport, it wasn't gonna do it. I had to really figure out. And so I did the television. I got to write. I called up Gilles Ben Simon, and I was like, Gilles, I really want to write a column about like what health and fitness, or like just have fun about that. And he's like, oh, Monster, called the magazine. And I think I had a column with all for like 3 or 4 years. And people used to say, who writes your stuff? And I'm like, yeah, no, I write my stuff. So it was also about kind of making sure you're sharpening your blade, because we know where life is going to take us. And also I understood that while I was playing volleyball, it was my passion. It felt like it was my credibility card. Like I had to earn that. I couldn't phone that in. I had to really show up. I was going to get my ass kicked if I didn't really do it. But beyond that, I knew that I would have to have a whole other life after that. And what was that going to look like? And I didn't want to look surprised or upset that the best time of my life was behind me. So it was just about always asking, where am I now? Where would I like to be in a year? 3 and 5? I was always doing that. And, but never doing things because, oh, that's what everyone's doing. What do you really want to do? And how are you going to do that? And what's your strategy? Because it's not like, oh, I'm going to make a business. It's like, well, what's your strategy? And if you don't know how to do something, who can you talk to that does? Because there's all that learning. And I always say, like, you can go to the top of the mountain in something, but when you start, again, you have to be willing to start on the bottom. Like, I'm happy to make phone calls and be like, hey, I don't know. Can somebody help me? And then what happens is in your 30s, I started having children. And you start going, it's really cool to be a gun for hire, but I understand the shelf life or the limitation on that for a number of reasons, whether it's the creative, the way you're depicted, they'll get someone else in a year or two. So then you start thinking, oh, I need to be a business owner. And you'll have failures, had failures, and they were all things in our wheelhouse. But then certainly, we have XPT, which is fitness, and we do have Laird Superfood, which was an organic accident. So I think it's just about understanding you have to be behind, and on the times I have to be in front, I'll be in front, but I actually really enjoy being behind. And like I said, being an owner of something versus, okay, am I still young enough? You know, that's a really hellish, slippery slope. I mean, I even do that now. I sometimes go, okay, how much longer can I, can I do that?
Well, God, I feel like I could talk to you for hours, and I'm going to try to keep to the show. But if you watch Gabby on Instagram, you're super, super real. That was really, most of all my guests I've met before, and I'm going to admit that I've never met Gabby Reece in my whole life, but I have been a giant fan of hers for literally 30 years. I'm from LA. I understand volleyball. I understand fitness. I used to watch your cable shows. But what was I going to say?
Just the show.
Pardon the show. Well, yeah, and I'm like, no, not show. So when you watch your Instagram, you're so candid and open, and that's why I thought this chick is so high vibe. She's so in touch with herself that you will talk about your weight. You'll talk about lots of different things, which I think is really it's just great to know yourself that way and be really comfortable. But so let's go back a little bit from when you got out of modeling, or no, sorry, when you decided to pick sports over modeling. Like, that's a time when people might have thought, you're crazy, you're making all this money, you're at the top of your game, you're going to Paris, London. Like, do you think the pull towards your athleticism was like a gut feeling in your gut? Okay, because
I think we all have that. I think there's somebody sitting now looking who has a real job, and they're sitting there, but they have an inner calling, and they're afraid that if they tell somebody, maybe they even went to law school or something. But if it's strong and you're not like all over the place and you're really willing to work at something and there is a real plan or strategy, I think I would always encourage people to listen to that, because the law school that you're not going to use will actually be useful in a way you don't understand yet. But it's so important to follow your own voice, if we can even hear it anymore, because people ask me all the time, what is success? I'm like, success is when your external life reflects as closely to who you really are. And I think playing sports and being sweaty and like being playful and being as big as I could be versus trying to be smaller, that felt good to me. So it wasn't a clear path. And I don't know that much is. But it's so important when it's constant. It doesn't mean like whimsical, like, oh, I hate this job and I wish I could. But when it's that thing inside that you'd get up for every day, even when it wasn't easy, I think that's really an important thing to listen to.
So I want to tell our viewers that we're going to answer some questions at the end. So keep on typing in, and we're going to look through at the end. Gabby can pick out whatever she wants to order. So answer. So please keep writing in your questions. But until then, tell me about how you decided to make fitness into more your business. I mean, obviously fitness was, but now with XPT, you guys are teaching, and you're teaching. Why I love XPT and knew about it from the very beginning is because when Gabby had this show that I used to fangirl back in, I don't know how, insider training, what year was that?
That was probably 14, 15, 13 years ago.
So I was a total fangirl of that show, and you would interview these athletes about how they would get their peak performance. From what I could understand, it's like, how can you do that? You know, 10% better, like the Kobe Jones one that I said about. He come back from an injury. Like, how do you fix it and then come back better? And it seems like that's what you and Laird have done with this XPT. So tell us a little bit about XPT, and then I want to hear about your podcast. You can talk about whichever one more that you want to. I'm so excited about the podcast because I think that this is what your fans have probably wanted from you all these years, is just to hear from you and hear you talking to people. But, tell us about both, and how much time are you spending on either? Is the podcast more of a focus? Is XPT?
XPT, and I won't drag it on, especially because it's a fashion group, but, XPT is really just an extension of some training modalities that Laird and I were doing. And I have a very close friend that I actually used to play volleyball at the same time with. We didn't really play too much with each other, and then we did other business together. And she's like, you have to share this with people and do the thing. And I was like, how are we going to share this with people? But the idea behind XPT is you know, Laird and I would be considered aging athletes, right? So how are we continuing to go, go, and go? And what you learn is like, life is all about adapting for all of us, right? We have to adapt. It's always going to change. We can't keep it the same. We have to adapt our food. We have to adapt our movement. Sometimes we got to get rid of friends, like whatever. We just are always adapting. And so there is a breathe, move, and recover component, because most of us are not breathing correctly. I will say this to the audience, please, unless you're sprinting on a track or somewhere, we need to all be nose breathing. If you catch yourself at your desk with your mouth open, close your mouth. The reason is, and I'll give you the science really quickly, when you breathe in and out through your nose only, your CO2 rises, which is the pressure that's a signal to your brain that, oh, we need to get breath. So what a lot of people do is they'll scrub their CO2, they'll go, but what happens is the only way for the oxygen in the bloodstream to get absorbed to the cell tissue, which really does translate to better health, is for CO2 to be high in the system. The oxygen cannot get absorbed if your CO2 is not high. Think about this. You ever pretend you're standing in the line in the grocery store today when we had no masks. You'd see one person, let's say they're older, standing like this. And the person behind you is standing like, right? You ask a boxing coach, when they see a fighter and the mouth is open, they know they're done. So really be mindful, and they can have tape that you can put over your mouth for when you sleep. So apnea, all these things can be really helped by nose breathing, keep the CO2, absorb the oxygen, and slow the breath down. We should probably, if you said it in ultimate, 5 or 6 inhales and exhales a minute. When you're mouth breathing, you're at 13 or 14 and you're over breathing, but you're not oxygenating your system. And when you breathe less and slow, you down regulate, you relax, you chill. When you're going, you agitate, you upregulate, you move into your sympathetic. So for people, just do that. I don't care about XPT. Do that. Nose breathe. Okay.
No, thank you. Because this is about, I mean, obviously, I developed this show to you're the most high performance person, I've ever interviewed, but it is a show about looking at, successful people in different areas, you cross fashion and fitness and all that, and seeing, what tools they use. And I think.
And it's free, and you could do it anywhere. And also try not to breathe. I'm going to give you one more point about breath, and we'll move on.
No, I love it. I love it. Bring it on.
Yes. That's called a vertical breath. We're not doing that. What we want to do is the round in the stomach and the back of the ribs opening. That's a circular breath. We want to breathe that way. So when we breathe in through the nose, we want to pull it into the belly. For my girls out there who are holding their belly in, let it be soft, let it go out. And make the breath in 3 points. Down in the belly, draw it up into the lower part of the ribs, and then into the lats. Let's say you go like 7 seconds in. That's badass. And then gently bring your belly button to your spine. Let the air out 7 seconds. You'll feel instantly a calm. So if you've had a really rough day, the only little thing to change is let the exhale be a tad bit longer than the inhale. You'll start to relax. You don't even have to think about it. You don't have to go like, oh, I need to relax. After 2-3 minutes of that, you'll chill out. Okay?
Thank you so much for that.
Do
you meditate? Do you meditate, Gabby?
I don't. I active meditate. So if I'm in my vehicle or I'm by myself, I know how to really check in with myself. And if stuff's acting really weird around me, I'll look at myself and go, what are you doing that you're attracting this energy to you? So I think it's about a check-in a couple times a day and just seeing how you're feeling. And people have to remember there's a million ways to skin the cat. If you hate the gym, it's okay. It's like, but it's about putting that practice together of what does work for you. How does eating that supports you work for you? Is that vegan, vegetarian, animal, high quality animal protein, whatever. If is it walking and hiking, fine. If you're an aging woman, I would encourage you to lift a little bit of weight, tension on for your bone health. But I think there's just so many ways to do it, but people just have to invest that time because it's like the best medicine there is.
Well, I did say on the tease that we were going to talk about practice only because I figured practice comes up in everything you do. You're an athlete, you have to practice. You're on a team, you have to practice. I can tell you practice, and practice takes discipline, which you naturally have developed. It sounds like you have a naturally disciplined personality. You called it rigid. I think it's probably discipline. And I think I try to You're learning to what?
I'm still working on I'm not making it rigid, but applying discipline when necessary and letting it go when not. I will even say I had a conversation with Laird today. We have a friend who's in the NBA, right? And they were saying like, oh, guys, you're in quarantine or they're in their room for 7 days. And I was like, it's funny because we could all get a little kooky over here, And I thought, yeah, if we were in Syria right now, imagine if you said, hey, listen, we're going to put you in a bubble in Disney World. And you can have room service and there's a clicker and a TV, but you can't really see anyone for 7 days. Would you be okay? And it's like, yeah, we'd be okay. And I think when we talk about discipline, I said to Laird, it's even sometimes, and people, I know it's hard. I'm not saying it's not hard. The discipline to be happy. Like just to be like, okay, and it's these impulses that we have as human beings. It's completely normal. But people have to realize there's a practice. I will say, okay, so for oxygen and breathing, there's a book called The Oxygen Advantage. I have nothing to do with it. It's just really good and scientific. It's by Patrick McCune. There's another book, I believe it's like The Art of Happiness. Anyway, Sean Aker, I can never say his name correctly, wrote this book. And what he talked about is, let's say at the end of every single day, you said, okay, I'm going to think of 3 things that were great. Like, oh, I had a beautiful meal and I had a nice exchange with that person at the market. And God, the light was beautiful today, whatever. Versus, there was some traffic on the road and this and that. But what happens is that your neuroreceptors that are looking for good news, if you're practicing that, they'll be, when you walk into a room, they'll be looking for good news. Wow. Conversely, when we're practicing the other, those neuroreceptors will come up. And when you walk into a room or a space or your day, they're just going to be looking for the shit. And so just even that practice, at the end of the day, and people go, oh, gratitude practice. I don't even have to get that fluffy. Just think three things, cool things, like whatever it is. I had a great phone call with somebody. I saw this bird that just was so glorious, whatever.
Yeah.
Practice that. It gets easier and easier and easier as far as happiness.
That is a wonderful tip. Thank you so much. Gabby, what about the Gabby Reece show? Oh. I mean, it's funny because my husband and I literally the one podcast, because I try not to get to, even when photo shoots, I never researched actors. I didn't know anybody and I found ignorance was bliss. But for this, I was like, let me get to know. She was the one, I guess she urged you to do a podcast. But tell me about that experience. You said you didn't like to be, you feel like, I don't know anything. You're extremely modest about all your capabilities. But how's that been going for you? Do you love it? What's the mantra? What's the purpose of the show?
I think, so I did a podcast years ago with a friend of mine, Neil Strauss, who's completely different. He wrote a book called The Game, sort of controversial, I guess. And then he wrote a book called The Truth. But I thought it'd be cool because we're so different. Then it was actually Joe Rogan, who's like, why don't you do your podcast? And I was like, I had been really thinking about it. And when I saw him, I was like, ugh, maybe that's a sign. But I really didn't want to, because the thing is, I am around so many really smart people. And I don't know if I could go maybe 10 good shows. We'll see. And I thought, this is why you should do it. When there's something you're really interested in, but it doesn't feel uncomfortable, I think it's very important to do it. And so for me, the premise of the show is I talk to all kinds of people. I talk to, scientists, race car drivers, athletes, whatever. But the thing for me that's always been important, and I alluded to it earlier in the conversation, is so you take these really high level people, whatever they're doing. And I think it's great. We can learn from them. Let's learn a little bit. But what I'm really interested in is how have they taken all that knowledge and information and work and function better in their real life? Because I'm in a place in my life for the last 10 years where I'm like, okay, I know a lot of successful people, but how do we show up in a more healthy or real or flexible or whatever kind of way we need to when we're someone's friend or when we're someone's lover or when we're someone's parent, because that's the hard stuff. And so I'm like, yo, that is what interests me, because okay, bang iron, jump up and down, show up, somebody's pretty, somebody can put their foot on the gas and drive something fast, they're a CEO, they got billions of dollars, that's cool. Maybe they weren't the super high IQ. By the way, I have friends, they're just born smarter than other people. So they invent and make stuff, and they're bosses, and they connect everything 10 times quicker than all of us. And so you go, that's why they're successful, and they're a complete hot mess. And also sometimes this high success keeps you from doing the work over here because people just sort of say, well, they're really successful or they're really good at that, and they let us off the hook over here. And I think it gets really interesting when you can try to do the work. Because then what it is it's like, oh, wait a second, we can keep growing and changing, and our minds can stay flexible and open forever and ever. And what the hell are we doing here? You know?
Yeah.
Really the premise of the show.
I love that. Yeah, I remember one time, we're going to get to some Q&As. I think we should start looking, but I remember you said that before. What?
You can pick the questions because it's your audience.
Okay. But I remember you saying on this podcast, you know, like you have an awareness, like life is short. Like, let's just max it out, man. Okay.
That is, I live with somebody who does very dangerous things, and Laird's level of clarity and his connection with nature is a very good influence on me because he's more in a good way. He's just natural, and it's like his white noise isn't crushing him the way it could crush me.
That's amazing. That's incredible. I wonder how you do that. Like, I don't know how in the hell he does what he does.
That's another level.
That's another story for a different day.
Yeah.
Gabby, this is from Carrie Irvine, Fine Art 212. Any advice on how to stay fit and focused in quarantine without access to a gym? That's a great question.
Okay, so first of all, it starts with getting to bed early and sleep so that you can recover and actually be rested. So the problem is it's the cyclical thing where we're home, we're not burning enough energy, and then we're having a hard time sleeping. So what I want to say to you is I implore you to try to get to bed as early as possible. And I know you're going to sound like, woo, 9 o'clock if you can. Make it a dark, cool space. So now you're rested and ready. I like to do things before because when the day's responsibilities hit us, I think they take away our energy banks and then we can't use it for training. And so listen, the beautiful thing about online is there's workouts everywhere. Everywhere there are workouts. So you don't need a bunch of stuff. You could use your body squats, lunges, push-ups. I'm not a bigger fan of sit-ups, people, because you're really strong from here to here and that's kind of not that functional. So I actually wouldn't I'd rather that you do planks or things like that. Sit-ups are kind of a misnomer. Walk, get outside, and the more that we can be, for those of you who are wearing masks all day, whenever you can slide it down and breathe clean air, and also, of course, whenever you are free to take it off, get it off so that you can breathe real clean air. It's so important. But the killer for us in quarantine is going to be our food. Right? Mindless snacking, boredom, stress, all these things. So if I could say sleep and food control will be the number one. And then just move your body in whichever way feels organic, you'll be fine. And I'll tell you guys, if there are breathing practices where you can actually rev up your system by breathing. So there's patterns that just go online and find patterns to upregulate, and you could literally sit in your room and get like a 10-minute zap just by like these kinds of upregulating breathing patterns, which is really good for your system.
So I noticed on the exhale, you breathe out your mouth with an exhale.
That's a dynamic breathing. The other nose speech is for living in life everywhere we go. And for people who are run, if they can actually go slower and less distance initially, they would keep their lactic acid further away if they nose breathed always. Because now think about this, CO2 is staying high, oxygenating cells and tissue, muscle, lactic acid further away. So what they'll have to do is just weigh out the frustration of, I really want to open my mouth and mouth breathe, go a little slower, you might go a little shorter, but you'll have huge gains.
Okay. This is my question. Gabby, I know that you and Laird eat really well. I know that you try to avoid gluten and there's some other things, but I think further to the question further to your answer, that there's physical things you can do, but maybe most important is your eating. Are there any like top tips that you could share with the audience of things that you think that they could do to just try to clean it up a little bit while they're staying at home?
Yeah, snacking will kick your ass, and it's kind of like, oh, what's the big deal, this and that. Because let me explain something about snacking. A lot of times the oils, whatever you're snacking on, is really what's kicking your health's ass, not the calories. So the oils are messing with cell function, mitochondria, like there's some other deeper things happening. So the problem with like the snacky stuff, it has all these ingredients in it that are just not supportive of your health. So let's eliminate that. What does that mean? That means when you get up in the morning, you have to make sure that you have whatever it is that you need that sets you up to be in a more level energy level throughout the day. Usually that involves a healthy fat. Okay, the 3 fats that I would eat only are coconut oil, good olive oil, which means not clear usually, because then they're usually mixed, and avocado oil. Okay, so you want to try to find unfiltered and real olive oil, because even some of the olive oils are mixed with other vegetable or canola or weird oils. So be really diligent about the oil intake. People don't realize this is what kills us, is some of these hard nut oils. So I would do that. Now, if you're vegan or vegetarian, a lot of those foods, and I'm not knocking it, they're processed. So this is about staying away from processed foods, because as a vegan, right, you're an alternative for this and tofurkey that and whatever. And I'm not ragging on these new meat that are not meat, but if you look at the ingredients, they're loaded with things that are very hard on us to digest and process. And through time, they're not great for health. So having said that, I just keep it really simple. Plants and animal. Make sure you're getting healthy fat, because then you'll feel satiated. It'll lead not to overeating. I know people are going to kill me for this, and I'll take it on the chin. The booze is not your friend. Okay, a glass of wine, red wine at night, a glass, not a bottle. Okay. And by the way, I recognize that it's a stressful time. So I'm not saying that, but just be clear. There's a lot of sugar and there's some things that can impact your sleep negatively. So you want to be hydrated. What does that mean? You have to have minerals. So is it salt? Is it sea drops? Something where you're actually genuinely being hydrated. This is so, so important for everything. Blue light at night. Either get your blue, blue blocking glasses at night. This is the other thing that kicks our sleep's ass, because it impacts our ability to make melatonin. So if you want to back it up, when you wake up in the morning, the first light you should look at is the natural light. Look at it. It won't be high in the sky. That sets you up for better night's sleep later. You just don't realize it, because your eyes help your brain, and then you'll make melatonin and you'll sleep better. So plants and animals, as few processed foods as you can, whole real foods, and don't be afraid of good fat. And listen, we eat a lot more than we need to. So if you're bored and you're stressed out, find an alternative. Like Laird used to drink a lot of wine. Laird battled being an alcoholic. So the wine bottle left, the Pellegrino came in, right? So also, because it's not about like none. You're stressed out. Do you have a friend you can call that makes you laugh? Do you have a walk you can go on? Do you got a dog? Like, figure out one for the other. And then, if you're a premenopausal woman, not long fasting, 10 hours to 12, that's it. If the rest of the group can go anywhere from 16 to 30, do that once every 2 weeks. You'll really give yourself a boost. You really only get the benefits of 30 hours. Nobody wants to hear that. I know it sucks. Coffee does not break a fast.
Coffee does not break a fast?
No, as long as you don't put stuff in it.
Okay.
But it doesn't, right? And I don't think stevia drinks do either, weirdly, but okay, so implement those kinds of things. And I think that can be helpful. So let's go through it. Sleep, hydration, no snacking. If you are vegan or vegetarian, watch those processed foods. Eat just till you're full. And let's say you're rocking it a couple weeks and you're like, I'm kicking ass and I really want to have ice cream. Enjoy it. Knock yourself out. I think it's never feeling like you can't. It's, hey, I do things that I'm trying to support myself. And once you do it long enough, you won't crave all that crap. In the beginning, we feel the minute it's like anything, like, don't look at my finger. Of course, we're rebellious. I say, don't eat bread. And if you want to eat bread, eat stuff that's risen. Eat the real stuff. They let it go for, the yeast is risen and it's a porridge bread or something that's real. So I think, and there's ways that you can cook in a creative way using quinoa instead of grains and sweet potatoes or what have you that give you that kind of full feeling.
Because and before, 2 questions on that. How many hours of sleep? You talk about sleeping a lot. I know you're really into sleep. How many hours do you recommend?
I mean, people need 7 to 8 hours.
Okay. Secondly, on the alcohol, people are drinking a ton. They're really drinking, as you pointed out, but they're really, everything is like wine o'clock, whatever.
Well,
I mean, pardon?
well, also I was going to say the only other thing to drink would be like tequila.
So tequila is better than wine if you're going to have to drink something.
Better, but if you have good tequila, like, you know, I mean, there's a lot of good tequila out there, but I think it's the only non-depressant. Remember, if you're drinking alcohol because you're bummed out and then it's a depressant, you're in this weird cycle. And I want to say, I know it's hard. I'm not saying I've lived with it. I've seen it. I know. But what I want to say is that we're all worth like not doing that to ourselves but finding a way to take the edges off. It's not about like, well, just suck it up. But what can you do other than that to take the edge off? But it's
yeah, it's hard. But I think when people realize how great they feel when they don't do it, you know, maybe that'll just be, maybe that'll be motivation enough. You know, I've had practice with not doing it, and it increases your performance in all areas, and that's that. Gabby, I want to thank you so much for being here. We're going to have to wrap up because Instagram's going to kick us off. Is there anything else that you wanted to share? I know we didn't really have any other questions, but Instagram's going to kick us off, and you gave us so much great, someone's talking about CBD oil. It's true.
Ed, very good brand, NED. It's very clean. So what I want to say to people is just do your best that you can. And if you don't do it the way you wanted to on today, tomorrow is another day. Don't beat yourself up. And like, you know, we're all in it together. So
I feel you. Listen, thank you so much, Gabby. You're just beyond amazing. And thank you so much for all your information. We're going to repost this so you guys people ask questions about everything you said in the books and all that stuff. So that'll be up later. And I can't thank you enough. And aloha and mahalo.
And aloha.
Aloha.
Bye.